For most of human existence, Earth was not the green-blue planet we see today. It was white, cold, covered in vast glaciers. This was not a brief episode in the distant past. It was the dominant condition for nearly 2.5 million years. During this time, ice sheets extended across continents. In the north, glaciers reached as far as present-day Germany, Poland, and northern France. In the south, alpine glaciers shaped the highlands of Africa and even touched the edges of the Mediterranean. Sea levels dropped over 100 meters, exposing land bridges between continents. Northern Asia was locked in permafrost. Much of Europe was tundra or steppe. Rainforests shrank. Deserts expanded. Across the globe, ecosystems collapsed and reorganized under the weight of the cold. This was the Ice Age, or more accurately, the Pleistocene epoch. It was not a single event, but a series of glacial and interglacial cycles, regulated by a predictable astronomical mechanism. That mechanism is known as the Milankovitch cycles, a set of slow, overlapping changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt. These cycles alter the distribution of sunlight reaching the planet, especially in the polar regions. Every 100,000 years or so, a shift in orbit pushes Earth into a deep freeze. Ice spreads, oceans retreat, and entire climate systems are disrupted. Then, over tens of thousands of years, another orbital shift warms the poles again. The ice melts. Forests return, sea levels rise, but the warmth never lasts. The cycles repeat. In total, Earth has undergone over 20 major glaciations during the Pleistocene. And between those cold periods, short interglacials, like the one we live in today, bring temporary relief. But make no mistake, the Ice Age was the norm. What we call climate change today is simply the planet reverting to its natural rhythm, one it has followed for millions of years. To survive in this world, life had to adapt radically. Average temperatures during glacial peaks were 6 to 10 degrees Celsius colder than today. But more than the cold, it was the volatility that shaped the biosphere. Precipitation patterns changed drastically. Rain fell in deserts. Forests turned to grasslands. Lush woodlands vanished in months, with less CO2 in the air, as low as 180 ppm during ice maxima. Plant life struggled, and food chains collapsed. Wind patterns intensified, carrying fine glacial dust across continents and ocean basins. Permafrost expanded. Rivers dried. Lakes became salt basins. And in areas where ice never reached, like Central Africa or Southeast Asia, the indirect effects were still severe. Droughts, fires, and ecological bottlenecks forced species to migrate, evolve, or disappear. This was the world where Homo sapiens evolved, a planet of extremes, instability, and danger. But it wasn't lifeless. In fact, the Ice Age supported a rich, if specialized set of biomes. Among them, the Mammoth Steppe stood out as the largest ecosystem on Earth. Stretching from Western Europe to Canada, it was a cold grassland dotted with hardy shrubs, the domain of mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, and predators like cave lions and wolves. To the south were open woodlands and dry forests, home to hominin populations and their prey. Further out, cold deserts and windswept plateaus formed natural barriers, limiting migration, but also offering isolated refuges. The geography of the Ice Age wasn't simply colder, it was reshaped entirely. With sea levels lower, the continents looked different. The Bering Land Bridge connected Siberia to Alaska. The Sunda Shelf united mainland Southeast Asia with modern Indonesia. Britain was not an island, but part of the European mainland. These exposed regions served as migration corridors for humans and animals alike. What's important to understand is this: the Ice Age did not just threaten human survival, it built the conditions for our emergence. Evolution favors those who adapt, and in this ever-shifting landscape, the hominins who thrived were those who could think ahead, work together, and innovate under pressure. These weren't luxuries, they were biological necessities. Fire became more than warmth. It was protection, Clothing wasn't optional, it was survival gear. Shelter turned from convenience into essential architecture. And cooperation, the ability to communicate, to remember, to teach, became the most valuable evolutionary tool of all. The Ice Age forged us, not through gentleness, but through relentless testing. It wasn't an apocalypse, it was a crucible. By the time Homo sapiens emerged around 300,000 years ago, the rules of survival had already been written by the ice. The rhythms of glaciation had taught earlier hominins, including Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, how to navigate this world. We inherited not only their genes, but their lessons: how to track prey across a white horizon, how to sense a storm before it came, how to build a life from snow, stone, and fire. The frozen earth wasn't an obstacle to humanity. It was the mold that shaped us. Part 2. Giants of the Frozen Plains. During the Ice Age, humans were not alone in the struggle for survival. They shared the landscape with some of the largest and most formidable animals ever to walk the earth. These were the megafauna of the Pleistocene, creatures uniquely adapted to cold, open environments. Their size was not just impressive, it was essential. Large bodies helped retain heat, navigate deep snow, and store fat through long winters. But size came with consequences. These animals required vast amounts of food, constant movement, and specialized adaptations to withstand the harshness of the glacial world. Among the most iconic was the woolly mammoth, an elephant relative standing over 4 meters tall, covered in thick fur, with massive, spiraling tusks used for defense, foraging, and perhaps social interaction. Close behind in size and significance was the woolly rhinoceros, armed with a heavy front horn and dense coat, browsing icy steppes for hardy vegetation. Predators, too, evolved to match the size and strength of their prey. The cave lion, larger than any lion alive today, hunted in packs across Europe and Asia. The giant short-faced bear of North America stood over 3 meters tall on its hind legs and could chase down prey at speeds unmatched by modern bears. Dire wolves, more robust than today's gray wolves, operated in tight-knit groups, relying on endurance and strategy. In the forests and plains roamed Megaloceros, the giant deer, with antlers spanning over 3.5 meters. And lurking in the water, giant crocodiles and prehistoric alligators patrolled riverbanks in warmer regions, ambushing anything that strayed too close. These animals defined the ecosystems of the Ice Age, not just as threats or marvels of evolution, but as integral parts of the food chain. Each species occupied a niche. Some grazed on grasses and mosses that survived the cold. Others scavenged or hunted across snow-covered ground, adapting to seasonal migrations and the limited availability of calories. Humans, arriving relatively late into this system, had to find their place, and fast. The early Homo sapiens and their archaic cousins were neither apex predators nor defenseless prey. They were opportunists, constantly shifting between roles depending on the situation. Alone, a human was vulnerable to lions, wolves, and even herbivores defending their young. In groups, however, humans became strategic and coordinated hunters. The interaction between humans and megafauna was not one-sided. These massive animals were a resource. A single mammoth could feed a group for weeks, provide hides for shelter, and yield bones and ivory for tools. But bringing one down required planning, cooperation, and risk, the kind of cognitive load that shaped our brains and social structures. Over time, certain animals took on symbolic significance. Evidence from cave paintings, such as those in Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira, reveals recurring depictions of mammoths, lions, bison, and rhinoceroses. These were not random drawings. The precision and repetition suggest memory, reverence, or even ritual. Some animals were feared, others were admired, all were remembered. In some cases, bones and skulls were arranged deliberately in early dwellings. Carvings of lions and mammoths were worn as pendants. These objects served more than decorative purposes. They were possibly tools for identity, storytelling, or spirituality. What emerges from this relationship is a clear pattern. Humans evolved in direct response to the animals around them. Our technologies, from spears to traps, arose from the need to compete with or survive these creatures. Our myths may have roots in real encounters: a mammoth charging across the steppe, a lion's roar echoing through a cave, a wolf pack circling in the night. Far from being passive observers of nature, humans were active participants in a high-stakes ecological drama. The presence of megafauna forced innovation. It demanded memory, it rewarded coordination, and it punished hesitation. These animals shaped our ancestors' behavior, and in doing so, helped shape what we eventually became. The giants of the frozen plains did not simply coexist with us, they challenged us. And in rising to meet that challenge, humans began the long journey from survival to dominance. Part 3. Many humans, one harsh world. For most of history, we thought we were alone. One species of human, Homo sapiens, standing at the top of the evolutionary ladder. But this is not true. Between 300,000 and 40,000 years ago, Earth was home to multiple human species coexisting across continents. We were never the only ones. We were part of a family of humans, diverse in form, culture, and adaptation, all shaped by the brutal conditions of the Ice Age world. Let us begin with the three main players. Homo sapiens, our own species, evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Physically lean, with high foreheads and small brow ridges, they were adapted not for brute strength, but for endurance, planning, and innovation. Their greatest tool was their mind, flexible, social, and imaginative. Homo sapiens were long-distance runners, capable of persistence hunting. They mastered language, symbolism, and complex tool use. Then, there were the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. Emerging in Europe and Western Asia, they were not our ancestors, but our cousins. Stockier, with barrel chests and powerful limbs, they were built for cold. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger, and their toolkits, especially the Mousterian tradition, were finely tuned for survival in glacial environments. They hunted in groups, cared for their sick and elderly, and buried their dead. Archaeological sites reveal evidence of fire use, jewelry, pigments, and possibly symbolic behavior. The third major group was the Denisovans, a mysterious human lineage first identified not by a skull or skeleton, but by a fragment of finger bone discovered in the Denisova cave in Siberia. Genetically distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans, Denisovans left behind little in terms of physical remains. But their genetic legacy is profound, especially in modern populations in East Asia, Papua New Guinea, and the Pacific. High-altitude adaptations found in modern Tibetans, for example, come directly from Denisovan DNA. Beyond these three were others. Homo heidelbergensis, possibly the common ancestor of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and sapiens, lived across Africa and Eurasia and showed early signs of large-scale hunting and complex cognition. Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of Indonesia, stood just over a meter tall and lived on the island of Flores until around 50,000 years ago, long after Homo sapiens had spread across Asia. And of course, Homo erectus, one of the longest surviving human species, whose legacy stretches back nearly 2 million years. They mastered fire, migrated out of Africa, and laid the groundwork for the evolutionary pathways that followed. These humans did not live in complete isolation. Genetic evidence confirms interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, between Neanderthals and Denisovans, possibly between all three. These weren't just brief encounters. In some cases, they resulted in children, And those children passed on traits that still persist in our DNA today, influencing immunity, metabolism, and physical performance. But if they could interbreed, were they truly separate species? The answer lies not in taxonomic definitions, but in behavioral differences. Each lineage developed its own technologies, social structures, and responses to environmental stress. Where sapiens tended to innovate rapidly and spread widely, Neanderthals refined their tools and stayed close to familiar ecological niches. Denisovans adapted to high-altitude, low-oxygen environments in a way no other human species could. Each had strengths. Each faced risks. This brings us to the central question: why did only one species survive? Not because it was the strongest. Neanderthals were more physically powerful. Not because it was the first. Homo erectus came long before. And not necessarily because it was more intelligent. At least not in terms of raw brain size. The survival of Homo sapiens was likely due to a convergence of traits: adaptability, ability to exploit a wider range of environments, social complexity, larger, more interconnected groups, cultural transmission, faster learning, better memory storage through symbols and language, flexibility and strategy, hunting, foraging, migrating, and even negotiating with other species. Where Neanderthals may have remained rooted in cold forests and familiar patterns, Homo sapiens moved. They entered new ecosystems, crossed rivers and mountains, and reshaped the landscape through fire, tools, and planning. There is no evidence of a single cataclysm that wiped out the others. No great war, no targeted extermination. Instead, the extinction of archaic humans was likely gradual, the result of shrinking ranges, declining populations, climate shifts, and eventually being absorbed into a rapidly expanding species that would leave no corner of the planet untouched. In the end, we did not outfight the other humans. We outlasted them. But they are not gone. Pieces of them live on in us, in our genomes, our immune systems, and perhaps in faint echoes of thought and memory shaped in a different world. We are not the only humans who ever lived. We are simply the last ones left. Part 4. The ice didn't kill us, it shaped us. The Ice Age was not a slow death sentence. It was a crucible, a high-pressure environment where only the most adaptable survived. From an evolutionary perspective, extreme and unstable climates create the strongest filters, not through violence, but through attrition. Populations collapse, food chains break, weather patterns shift abruptly. The cold does not negotiate. It demands change or extinction. In this world, survival did not favor the biggest or the strongest. It favored those who could anticipate, who could remember, who could plan ahead. These demands forced a new kind of intelligence to emerge. Not just cleverness, but flexible, social, cooperative thinking. The foundations of Homo sapiens. The cold didn't kill humans. It forced them to invent humanity. When temperatures dropped, Homo sapiens didn't grow fur. They skinned animals. They scraped hides with stone tools, used bone needles to stitch together tailored clothing, layered armaments for insulation, and fashioned boots and hoods. Archaeological finds from sites like Kostenki and Dolny Vestinice show evidence of sophisticated clothing design, far beyond basic wrapping. Where caves were not available, humans built shelter, pit dwellings, tents made from mammoth bones and hides, semi-subterranean lodges insulated with snow. These were not temporary solutions. They were engineered spaces designed to capture heat and protect from wind. Fire was not optional. It was survival technology. But using fire wasn't enough. Homo sapiens learned to control it, to preserve embers, and to store fuel. In frozen landscapes where dry wood was rare, this required foresight. Planning became a daily necessity. Food scarcity was constant. Hunting success was inconsistent. For this reason, sapiens learned to preserve meat, drying it, smoking it, caching it in frozen ground. Bones were cracked for marrow. Organs were consumed for fat and micronutrients. Nothing was wasted. But the key adaptation wasn't physical, it was social. the cold demanded cooperation. Hunting megafauna like mammoths or bison required teams. Tool production relied on knowledge transfer. Firewood gathering, shelter maintenance, food distribution all depended on group coordination. The Ice Age made isolation deadly and community essential. This pressure led to a leap in cognitive evolution. Larger groups needed structure. Structure required communication, and communication needed language, not just for immediate needs, but for storytelling, memory, and teaching. This is how culture began, not with art, but with information. Natural selection did not reward brute force. It rewarded those who could share innovations, pass down knowledge, and raise offspring in stable environments. This explains why Homo sapiens evolved not only larger brains, but also longer childhoods. Children became learners, elders became teachers. Knowledge became the currency of survival. The logic is simple. In a world where the environment could turn lethal in a single season, the ability to predict the future, even imperfectly, was worth more than any physical trait. The mind became the most important survival organ. We see the evidence of this in our own bodies today. Modern humans possess genes for cold adaptation. Some inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans, others developed through independent mutation. These genes regulate fat storage, vascular responses, and metabolism under thermal stress. Inuit populations, for example, carry genetic variants that allow high-fat diets without cardiovascular damage, a trait shaped by life in the Arctic. Our digestive systems still bear the imprint of Ice Age diets. Enzymes like amylase vary in populations depending on ancient access to starches. Vitamin D metabolism remains a concern in high-latitude descendants due to reduced sunlight exposure. Even our reflexes carry the memory of the Ice Age. Heightened sensitivity to sudden sounds, startle responses in darkness, a deep, primal fear of isolation. These are not flaws. They are ancestral warning systems, shaped by millennia of survival in a world where being alert meant staying alive. And yet, for all our adaptations, Homo sapiens were not superior by default. We were not faster than horses, not stronger than bears, not more insulated than wolves. We didn't have claws, fangs, or thick hides. What we had, and still have, is the ability to adapt faster than biology alone allows. We could invent, teach, cooperate, reflect, build, and in doing so, we turned a hostile world into a livable one. The Ice Age didn't make us human in spite of its dangers. It made us human because of them. Part 5. Fire in the Cold Night, the Birth of Culture. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, survival depended on more than just tools and strength. It required something less tangible, something invisible, yet essential. Fire. At first glance, fire appears as a tool, a way to cook food, ward off predators, and stay warm in sub-zero temperatures. But archaeological evidence reveals that fire played a far deeper role. It was a social engine, a psychological anchor, a trigger for human culture. Picture the scene: a glacial night, snow piled high, stars sharp in the black sky. In the center, a group of early humans gathers around a fire. They roast meat, they pass bone tools, and they speak, or gesture, or hum. The details are lost to time, but what remains is the structure, the fire as a nucleus of community. Around the fire, ideas moved, knowledge spread. Children listened, adults remembered, elders taught. This was not a coincidence. The environment forced it. In daylight, humans moved, hunted, built, searched. But at night, there was nowhere to go. The cold outside the fire's reach was lethal. The darkness beyond the light was filled with predators. So, humans stayed close, not for comfort, but for survival. And in that enforced proximity, something unexpected happened. Communication evolved. Anthropologists propose that language may have developed not during the hunt, but during the pause. Around the fire, there was time to share strategies, warn of dangers, name locations, assign tasks. Over generations, this need likely produced structured language, beginning with shared sounds, expanding into grammar. Language enabled memory to be passed across time, not just to the next person, but to the next generation. These fireside hours also gave birth to something equally important: storytelling. Humans began to transmit oral traditions, myths about ancestors, lessons from past winters, interpretations of animal behavior. These were not entertainment. They were survival data, encoded in symbolic form. Through stories, knowledge became resilient. Children learned what plants to avoid, how to read tracks in snow, where to find shelter, and when to move before a storm. This transmission of experience created what cognitive scientists call collective memory. It is not written, but shared through repetition, ritual, and emotional resonance. The fire made this possible. It was the stage, the spotlight, the classroom, and the sanctuary. In parallel, humans began to develop symbols, abstract marks with shared meaning, carvings on bone, red ochre on stone, geometric shapes etched into cave walls. These were the beginnings of visual language, perhaps the precursor to writing. Symbols and stories eventually combined. What started as simple marks evolved into myths, rituals, and social identity. This process is not speculative. Across Ice Age archaeological sites, from France to South Africa, we find recurring patterns. Hearths surrounded by tools, bones arranged deliberately, pigments stored in shells, repeated engravings in rock shelters. The conclusion is consistent. Fire didn't just change human physiology, it reshaped human cognition. It turned isolated individuals into social groups. It provided the temporal space to reflect, and it turned memory into legacy. Many modern human behaviors still mirror these origins. The dining table, where people gather to eat and talk. The campfire, still a centerpiece of group bonding. The bedtime story, passed from parent to child. The ritual, the festival, the communal song, all share a structure born in the flickering glow of Ice Age flames. Even today, in the absence of electricity, we instinctively seek firelight. We light candles during blackouts. We gather around fireplaces in winter. We host barbecues and celebrate holidays around open flames. These are not cultural accidents. They are cognitive fossils, preserved behaviors from a time when fire was life. The birth of human culture didn't begin with cities or scripts. It began when the first humans sat still long enough, in the cold, in the dark, to talk. Not just to act, but to remember, to imagine, to explain. And it happened around fire. Part 6. We are children of the ice. Modern humans live in climate-controlled spaces, surrounded by artificial light, protected from the elements. But beneath the surface, in our bodies, instincts, and emotions, the Ice Age remains. We are not removed from that frozen world. We are shaped by it. The Ice Age was not just an environmental event. It was a long, continuous process of selective pressure. And every surviving human today carries its signature, etched into our biology. Our reflexes, and our psychology, start with the body. Modern humans still respond to cold with ancient reflexes. Blood vessels constrict, skin tightens, hairs stand on end, even if they no longer provide insulation. Shivering, a rapid muscle contraction to generate heat, is a survival mechanism developed to resist freezing. But the legacy of cold goes deeper than thermoregulation. Many of our anxieties and preferences are Ice Age inheritances. Consider the fear of darkness. Across cultures and continents, children and adults alike report unease in unlit environments. This is not a coincidence. In glacial periods, nightfall meant real danger, predators, exposure, or isolation. Avoiding the dark was not irrational. It was survival logic. Why do humans prefer to sleep near others? Why do people gather in circles around light, from fireplaces to TV screens? The answer is ancestral behavior. For hundreds of thousands of years, staying close to fire and close to the group increased chances of survival. It meant warmth, protection, shared resources, and warning of threats. Those who wandered alone into the night were less likely to return. This is why we're drawn to proximity and community, not as a social trend, but as a biological imperative forged under extreme conditions. Even our stress responses reflect this past. The Ice Age was a time of uncertainty. Food supplies fluctuated, climate patterns shifted rapidly, competition was high. The result? Humans evolved with a survival mindset hardwired into their neurobiology. We are hyper-alert to change. We detect threat faster than reward. We remember danger longer than safety. Our brains prioritize bad news. This negativity bias was useful when life depended on anticipating hazards. Today, it manifests as anxiety, risk aversion, and the need for control. We call this overreaction. Evolution calls it preparation. Behavioral economists, psychologists, and neuroscientists have repeatedly confirmed that modern humans are not rational calculators. We are emotional, reactive, and group-dependent because those traits were adaptive in the environment where our ancestors lived. Even the desire to tell stories, create myths, and believe in forces beyond the visible world, these can be traced back to Ice Age cognition. When patterns were hard to detect and outcomes uncertain, storytelling became a tool to organize memory and guide behavior. It was not entertainment. It was information storage. So what does this mean? It means we're not just living after the Ice Age. We are living with it, carrying its code in our genome and its lessons in our minds. The idea that the Ice Age is over is misleading. Its consequences are not. From the immune system's response to cold viruses, to the way we organize ourselves into families, tribes, and nations, the Ice Age continues to shape the structure of human experience. Recognizing this is not nostalgia, it is science. The evolutionary pressure of glacial epochs selected not only for physical endurance, but for cognitive and emotional traits that remain active today. These traits explain why humans respond so strongly to group exclusion, why we fear chaos, and why we still create rituals around light, warmth, and belonging. In short, we are not separate from our past. We are its expression. And if you look closely, you can still see it in the shiver when the wind turns cold, in the hesitation before stepping into the dark, in the instinct to gather near others when danger looms. This is not superstition. It is memory, biological, collective, and embedded. The Ice Age built us, and it still speaks through us. Imagine this: a small fire flickering in the snow, a group huddled around it, eyes reflecting the flames. That scene played out for thousands of years. Now picture your own eyes, illuminated by a screen, or a candle, or a campfire. The reflection is the same. We are the continuation of that ancient gaze, the descendants of those who endured, adapted, and passed on their warmth. We are, in every sense, children of the ice.